Welcome to JavaScript tutorial series for beginners. In this episode, we're going to learn about JavaScript loops. Loops are part of any programming languages, not only JavaScript. So if you learn the concept of loops, then probably you can use that knowledge in some other languages also, like Java, C++, Python, any programming language you think of, they have loops. So learning the concept of loops is really important. Alright, let's start coding. So I've written these 3 lines of code, and if you're following my tutorial, you can guess what the output is. In the first line, that is line number 4, we're initializing one variable called a, and then we're incrementing that variable, and then after that we're printing the value of a is the value of a. So if I run this code, node main.js, you can see the value of a is 1. Now what if I want to execute line number 6 and 7 multiple times in a loop? How will you do that? That's where the concept of loop comes into picture. Let's say I want to execute this line number 6 and 7 10 times or 15 times. See, if I just want to execute these 2 lines maybe twice or thrice, then we can simply copy and paste the lines. But what if we want to execute these 2 lines 100 times or 200 times? How will you do that? And that's when you need the loops. So in JavaScript and in most of the languages, loops can be written in 2 3 different ways. We can write loop with while keyword, we can use do while, or we can use for loop. So these 3 types of loops are possible in JavaScript. So first we're going to explain while and do while, and after that we're going to see how you can use for. And make sure you watch the full video because the for loop is the most important loop that we use in our daily programming tasks. So don't miss that. So first we're going to write one while loop. So let's say we want to execute line number 6 and 7 3 times. Okay, what we can do is using while loop, we have to write a keyword while and then a parenthesis, and then we have to write on curly brace. Inside the curly brace, you will move the line of code that you want to execute multiple times. So let's understand the structure of this while loop. So in a while loop, we have a keyword while, and then we have one parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis, we're going to write our condition. Okay, and then after that we have one block. This is the block. Inside the block, you will write your code that you want to run in a loop. So here inside the parentheses, we have to write our condition. So what kind of condition it can be? Condition means some Boolean logic. One simple condition can be, we have one variable a, right? So we can add something like a greater than or a less than 10. This is one condition. So we are telling the compiler to execute this line number 7 and 8 multiple times as long as a less than 10. So if I run this code, node main.js, you can see we're executing these 7 and 8 multiple times. That's why initially the value of a is 1, then it is becoming 2, then 3, up to 10. So how is it working? Let's understand the code line by line. So in the first line, line number 4, let a equals to 0. That is fine. We're initializing the variable a with the value 0. Then line number 5 is empty, and in line number 6 we're writing while a less than 10. So for the first time, what will be the value of a? Is going to be 0. So as the a is 0, that means the condition will satisfy. Then JavaScript will start executing line number 7 and 8. Then in line number 8 we'll print the first value of a, that is 1. And then what will happen? And then the JavaScript will start executing line number 6 again. This time a's value has been changed. What is the new value of a? Now the value is 1, and 1 is less than 10. That is true. So it will execute the line number 7 and 8 again, and this way it will keep on executing line number 7 and 8 multiple times. So what is going to be the last value of a? The last value of a here in line number 6 will be 9, because when it becomes 10, it will not execute. Alright, so the last value of a will be 9. Then the loop will start, a equals to a plus 1, and a will become 10, and then console log a, that is 10. And that's why in our output terminal we can see that the last value of a is 10. Alright, that is a while loop. Then what is a do while loop? Do while loop is also almost similar to while loop. The only difference is that instead of writing this while condition at the beginning of the loop, we're going to write this condition at the end of the loop. So what will change here? Instead of writing while here, we're going to remove that, and in line number 9 we're going to write the condition, and in line number 6 we'll simply start our loop with a keyword called do. So the loop will look like this. So it's like saying do this, do execute these lines while a is less than 10. So what will be the difference? Let's execute this again. You can see there is no difference actually, because it is basically doing the same. The only difference is that instead of checking the condition at the beginning of the loop, we are checking the condition at the end of the loop. So you might ask here that if while and do while both are same, then why do we have two types of loops, right? There's one difference that I already told you, that in do while loop we are checking the condition at last. So in this example we don't have any difference, right? But let's change the example a little bit. So instead of checking like a less than 10, we're going to check a less than 0. That means this condition will always fail. So what happens when we execute this? So you can see that we are executing this loop once, and that's the difference. Even though the condition is failing all the time, we are still executing the loop at least once, because initially we're not checking the condition, we're checking the condition at the end of the loop, and that's the difference. But if I use a while loop instead of do while loop, what will happen here? Now if I execute this, you can see it is not returning anything. That means in line number 6 only it is checking if a is less than 0 or not, and the condition will fail, and that means we're not going to execute line number 7 and 8 at all. So again, what is the difference? In do while loop we are always going to execute the loop at least once. Alright, the third type of loop is for loop. I think this is the most commonly used loop, even though it is personal preference which loop you're going to use, but I have seen most of the people use just for loop when they want to just write some simple loops. And in for loop also we have two different type of for loops, actually three types of for loop. One is the simple for loop, another one is for off, another one is for in. So for off and for in are a little bit advanced concept, but for loop is the basic, you should learn that, but I will explain for off and for in as well. So what is a for loop? Let's write some code. I'm going to remove our while loop and I'm going to write a for loop here. So for loop has 3 placeholders, and after that we have one curly brace. Inside that curly brace we have to write our code that we want to loop. Alright, so what we're going to write inside these placeholders? So here in the first placeholder we're going to write our initial condition or initialization, and then after the semicolon we're going to write our condition, and after that we're going to write our increment or decrement. So let's write some example, right? So let's write some example. So the first part of the for loop is the initialization. So let's initialize one variable I that is going to be 0 initially. So I've written let I equals to 0. You know the meaning of let. It is going to create one variable I and we're initializing it with 0. Fine. After the semicolon we have to write our condition. Let's say our condition is I less than 5, right? Then again semicolon, and after that we have to write our increment or decrement operator. So in this case I want to increase I, right? So I'm going to write I plus plus. So this plus plus operator will increment I after each loop. All right, So what will happen here? First, JavaScript will execute this initialization part, that is let I equals to 0. So i's value will be 0 at first, and then it will execute the condition, and if the condition satisfies, it is going to execute the loop content, and after that it will execute the third portion, that is the increment part, and after incrementing it will check the condition again, and if the condition still satisfies, then the JavaScript will execute the loop again, and it will continue like that. So what's the order? First time initialization, then check the condition. If the condition satisfies, then execute, and then after that you increment or decrement, mainly execute the third part. All right. So if I run this code, what will happen? This line number 7 and 8 will be executed for 5 times, right? 1 2 3 4 5. Now instead of incrementing it, you can also decrement it using I minus minus, but in this case this loop will not end, right? It will execute forever, because the I less than 5, this condition will satisfy all the time. So if I execute this again, what will happen? See, this is what is happening. Okay, I'm going to terminate it. So this is one example of infinite loop. You should never do that, otherwise your program will not terminate. So always make sure that your loop is not going to infinite loop whenever you're writing any loops. So in this scenario, let's flip the condition. Instead of I less than 5, let's write if I greater than 5, until I greater than 5, and initialize the I with something like 8. So initially the I value will be 8, and then it will be 7 6 5. Now if I execute it, it's executing only 3 times. So simply, if you want to execute some code, let's say 3 times or 10 times, then just you can write one for loop, right? I equals to 0, then I less than 10, and then I plus plus. This is a common pattern used everywhere. So as I told you before, that we have for off and for in loop also, but before explaining those, let's introduce 2 more keywords, that is break and continue. We have 2 keywords, break and continue. Let's see how it works. So suppose in this example you have written this loop. This loop is going to be executed for 10 times, but in between 10 times you want to break it. Okay, you don't want to continue that loop. So what you can do is you can use this break keyword depending on some condition. So let's say I'm writing some if condition. If a is greater than 5, then you break. What is the meaning of this? That means whenever the line number 9 will be executed, that time it will break the loop, it will not continue it, right? If I execute it, you can see even though the for loop is going to be executed for 10 times, in between, in the line number 9, we are breaking it. So this break keyword is used for breaking the loop immaturely. And another keyword is continue. So continue means, let's write some continue. If a equals to 5, then you continue. What is the meaning of this? This means if a equals to 5, then you continue to the next iteration. That means when a equals to 5, this loop will not execute line number 11, and immediately it will go to the next iteration. So it's like saying, okay, do not break it, you stop executing any more lines in the loop and then go to the next iteration. So if I execute it again, you can see line number 5, that a equals to 5 is missing, right? Because when a equals to 5, we're continuing it, and that means for that time line number 11 will not execute. So I hope break and continue is clear. Now we can move on to for off and for in To understand for off and for in, we need some array. Okay, in last episode we learned about array, so I hope you can remember that. Okay, so let's remove the code and write some array. Let r equals to some array. So let's say it is string array. So in this string array we have three different strings, a, b and c. Now I want to iterate over this array and print each element. What will you do? You can simply write one for loop. You have learned about for loop already. So for let I equals to 0, then I less than add dot length, then I plus plus. So add dot length means the length of the array. That means it will be 3 here. Initially the I will be 0, then 1 and then 2, and when the I will be 3, that time the loop will break. Alright, so we can write console log r of I. So each time the loop will execute, the value of I will change. Initially the value will be 0, then 1, then 2, accessing the ith element from the array, and then we are printing it. Up until now it is simple. If I execute this code, node main.js, you can see we are printing a, b and c. It's pretty straightforward. So instead of manually writing this kind of for loop, JavaScript has given two different types of for loop, that is for in and for off. Using for in and for off, you can iterate the array or any object, because it works on any iterable types. We'll learn about that later. So instead of writing these conditions, we can write for let item in array, and then you print the item. Now if I execute this, you can see I'm printing 0, 1 and 2. What is happening here? So we have seen that in regular for loop we have three parts, right? Initialization, condition, and then the increment part. But here in for in loop we have two parts only. We have in the right side we have the array, and in the left side we have one variable. So what is happening here? So we are saying that you iterate over this array and extract the index. So let item in array, or I should call it let index in array, right? This is the correct variable name. So let index in array. So index is going to be at first 0, then 1, then 2. Alright, but if I use for off loop, so instead of for in we can use for off. That means we are going to get the value of the array instead of index. So here we can call as item. It can be any variable, but for the convenience we're writing this. Now if I execute this, you can see we are printing a, b and c. So then what is the difference between in and off? In for in loop, we're going to iterate over the array and we'll get the index. For off loop, we're going to iterate over the array, and for each loop we're going to get each item. Alright, that's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something, and if you liked it, please hit like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.